The lights in the television studio were bright and hot. Karoline Leavitt sat in her chair, back straight, hands folded neatly on her lap. She was early, as always. The show would not start for another 45 minutes. But Karoline believed in being prepared. A production assistant had already clipped a small microphone to her blue blazer. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place. This was not her first time on national television, but tonight felt different. The producers had told her that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez would be joining the panel. They had never debated face-to-face before. Karoline took a sip of water and reviewed her notes one more time. "Ms. Leavitt, we need you in makeup," a young man with a clipboard said, appearing at her side. She nodded and followed him through the maze of cables and cameras. The makeup room was small but bright. Pictures of famous news anchors and politicians lined the walls. Karoline sat in the chair and closed her eyes as the makeup artist went to work. "Nervous?" the makeup artist asked, applying foundation. "Prepared?" Karoline replied with a small smile. In the hallway outside, she could hear people talking. The studio was coming alive as the hour of broadcast approached. Producers with headsets rushed back and forth. Camera operators checked their equipment. The energy was building. Karoline thought about her journey to this moment. She had worked hard to get here. From her days as a press assistant at the White House to her current role as a spokesperson, she had climbed each step with determination. At 25, she was young for such visibility, but she had earned her place through hard work and quick thinking. The makeup artist finished her work, and Karoline returned to the green room. She checked her phone. Messages from colleagues wished her luck. Her parents had sent a text too. "Stay calm, tell the truth, be yourself." Simple advice that had served her well. The door opened and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked in. She wore a red dress and carried a tablet. Their eyes met, and both women nodded in professional acknowledgement. They had never spoken in person before, though they had commented on each other's positions through social media and press statements. "Congresswoman," Karoline said politely. "Ms. Leavitt," AOC replied with equal formality. They sat on opposite sides of the room. The tension was not personal. It was ideological. They represented different visions for America, different understandings of what the country was and what it should be. Tonight, those visions would clash on live television. A producer entered the room. "We're live in 20 minutes, ladies. The format is as follows. Opening statements, 2 minutes each. Then we move to questions from our host. The topic is the new infrastructure bill, but we may branch out to other current issues. We expect a lively but respectful debate." Both women nodded. The producer left, and silence returned to the room. Alexandria was reviewing something on her tablet, occasionally making notes with her finger. Karoline watched her from the corner of her eye. She respected the Congresswoman's rise from bartender to national political figure. Even though they disagreed on almost every issue, Karoline could appreciate the work ethic that such a journey required. The minutes ticked by. Karoline felt the familiar pre-show energy building in her chest. Not anxiety, but readiness. She had done her research. She knew the facts and figures about the infrastructure bill. She had anticipated the arguments that would come from the other side. She was ready. A production assistant appeared at the door. "Time to take your positions on set." Both women stood up. They walked side by side down the hallway, neither speaking. The set was larger than it appeared on television. 4 chairs were arranged in a semicircle, with the host's desk positioned opposite them. Cameras stood like sentinels around the space. "Ms. Leavitt, you'll be in the first chair. Congresswoman, you're in the third," the assistant said, pointing. They took their seats. 2 other guests would join them shortly, an economics professor and a labor union representative. The full spectrum of opinion would be represented. Technicians approached to check their microphones one final time. The floor director counted down the minutes. 5 minutes to air. 4. 3. Karoline took a deep breath. She thought about the millions of people who would be watching. Some would agree with her, many would not. But she wasn't here to be liked by everyone. She was here to present a perspective she believed in, to defend ideas she thought were important for the country. The host arrived, a veteran broadcaster known for his tough questioning of guests from all political backgrounds. He greeted everyone, professionally, then took his seat. The final checks were completed, 1 minute to air. Just so you know, the host said quietly to the panel, I'm going to push all of you tonight. The viewers deserve real answers, not talking points. The red lights on the cameras came on. The floor director pointed at the host. They were live. Good evening, America, the host began. Tonight we're discussing the $2 trillion infrastructure package currently making its way through Congress. Is it a vital investment in America's future, or an irresponsible spending spree that will burden generations to come? We have assembled a panel representing diverse perspectives on this issue. The cameras moved from face to face as the host introduced each guest. And joining us tonight, we have Karoline Leavitt, former White House Assistant Press Secretary and current Republican spokesperson, and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Democrat from New York's 14th District. Karoline smiled briefly at the camera, projecting confidence and approachability. The introduction continued with the other panelists. Ms. Leavitt, let's begin with you, the host said. Your party has characterized this infrastructure bill as a Trojan horse filled with progressive wish list items. Can you elaborate on those concerns? Karoline nodded, her expression serious but not severe. This was the opening she had prepared for. Thank you for having me, she began. Americans across the country want good roads, safe bridges, and reliable internet. These are not partisan issues. The problem with this bill is that only about 25% of the $2 trillion actually goes to traditional infrastructure. The rest funds programs that have little to do with roads or bridges. Alexandria was already shaking her head, waiting for her turn to respond. The host noticed and turned to her. Congresswoman, you're visibly disagreeing. Your response? The very definition of infrastructure is changing, Alexandria said, leaning forward with energy. In the 21st century, infrastructure isn't just concrete and steel. It's childcare that allows parents to work. It's high-speed internet that connects rural communities to the global economy. It's clean energy that addresses the climate crisis. The debate was underway. Back and forth they went, each making points that reflected their deeper worldviews. The economics professor provided context about national debt and interest rates. The union representative spoke about job creation and worker protections. As the first segment neared its end, the host shifted the topic slightly. Let's broaden our discussion. This infrastructure debate is part of a larger conversation about America's future. Congresswoman, you've been vocal about the need for fundamental changes to many American systems. Could you expand on that vision? Alexandria sat up straighter. Karoline could sense that the conversation was about to enter more controversial territory. She readied herself, knowing that what would come next might require a firm response. The commercial break signal flashed. We'll continue this discussion when we return, the host said to the camera. As the lights dimmed slightly, Karoline took another sip of water. The real debate was just beginning. She felt centered and calm. The facts were on her side, she believed. All she needed to do was present them clearly and confidently. Back in 30 seconds, called the floor director. Alexandria was reviewing her notes. The host was listening to something in his earpiece. The studio was quiet for a moment, the calm before the storm of words that would soon fill the airwaves and, likely, social media feeds across the nation. Karoline straightened, her papers. Whatever came next, she was ready. The bright red light on the camera blinked back to life. The commercial break was over. Karoline straightened her posture as the host welcomed viewers back to the program. She could feel the energy in the studio shift. The polite opening exchanges were finished. Now the real debate would begin. Welcome back, the host said. Before the break, we were discussing the infrastructure bill, but now I'd like to broaden our conversation. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you've often spoken about the need for fundamental changes to American systems. Could you explain what you see as the most pressing problems facing our country today? Alexandria leaned forward, her eyes bright with passion. This was a topic she had spoken about many times before. America has always been a nation of great promise, she began. But too often, that promise has not been available to everyone. Today, we face a climate crisis that threatens our very existence. We have millions of people who can't afford health care. Young people are drowning in student debt. Working families can't afford housing. She gestured with her hands as she spoke, her voice growing more intense. The systems we have now were built to benefit the wealthy and powerful. Our tax code favors billionaires while working people struggle. Our healthcare system treats illness as a profit center rather than a human right. Our energy policy is destroying the planet for future generations. Karoline watched carefully, making notes on her pad. She could see the professor nodding along with some points, while the union representative was practically at the edge of his seat in agreement. The American dream is becoming a nightmare for too many people, Alexandria continued. And when I point this out, I'm called unpatriotic. But I believe the most patriotic thing we can do is to be honest about our problems, so we can fix them. A country that works for everyone. That's the America I'm fighting for. The camera panned to Karoline. She could feel it was her moment to respond. The host turned to her. Ms. Leavitt, the Congresswoman has painted a rather stark picture of America's current state. How do you respond? Karoline took a small breath. She had anticipated this turn in the conversation. She looked directly at the camera, her blue eyes steady. I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion, she began, her voice calm but clear. But I have to respectfully disagree with both her diagnosis and her prescription. She turned slightly to face Alexandria directly. America isn't perfect, no nation is. But to characterize our country as fundamentally broken or built to benefit only the wealthy ignores the tremendous progress we've made and the opportunities that exist here that don't exist anywhere else in the world. Karoline glanced down at her notes briefly, then continued. People from around the world still risk everything to come here. Why? Because despite our flaws, America remains a beacon of freedom and opportunity. Our systems aren't designed to keep people down. They're designed to lift people up who are willing to work hard and take responsibility. Alexandria was already shaking her head, preparing her rebuttal, but Karoline wasn't finished. The Congresswoman talks about healthcare, education, and climate. These are important issues, but her solutions involve massive government control and spending that would fundamentally change the character of our nation, and not for the better. Karoline picked up a sheet of paper from her notes. The proposals the Congresswoman supports would cost trillions of dollars. That money doesn't appear from nowhere. It comes from taxpayers, including middle-class families already struggling with inflation and rising costs. The host turned to Alexandria. Congresswoman, would you like to respond? Absolutely, Alexandria said, leaning forward. First, when we talk about government spending, let's be clear about what that means. It means investing in our people. And these investments pay for themselves many times over. She turned to face Karoline directly. Ms. Leavitt talks about America as a land of opportunity. But that opportunity isn't equally available. A child born in poverty in America has less chance of climbing the economic ladder than in almost any other developed nation. That's not an opinion. That's data. Karoline wrote something down, waiting for her turn. And when we talk about who pays, Alexandria continued, I'm not proposing that middle-class families pay more. I'm proposing that billionaires and corporations finally pay their fair share. The top 1% in this country has more wealth than the bottom 90% combined. That's not a functioning economy. That's a broken system. The professor cleared his throat, and the host turned to him. If I may add some context here, he said, both perspectives have merit, but the data suggests that inequality in America has indeed reached levels not seen since the 1920s. However, government spending alone won't solve structural problems without addressing root causes. The union representative jumped in. Working people see this every day. They work harder and harder but fall further behind while CEO pay skyrockets. The host turned back to Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, your response? Karoline nodded, her expression serious but not angry. I think we need to be careful about the narrative that America is fundamentally unjust or broken, she said. That kind of rhetoric divides us and frankly isn't accurate. She turned a page in her notes. Let me offer some perspective. Over the past decades, global extreme poverty has fallen dramatically. Technology has created opportunities that never existed before. Medical advances have extended lifespans. And yes, we still have problems to solve, but the way to solve them isn't to tear down the systems that created so much progress. Alexandria was visibly frustrated now. But that progress hasn't been shared equally, she interjected, and the systems you're defending are the same ones that have left millions behind. The host raised his hand slightly. Let's focus on specific examples. Congresswoman, you've been critical of American foreign policy in recent statements. You suggested that America's role on the world stage has often been harmful rather than helpful. Could you elaborate? Alexandria straightened in her chair. This was moving into even more controversial territory. America's intentions on the world stage are often good, she began. But we have to be honest about the results. Our military interventions have destabilized entire regions. Our economic policies have sometimes exploited developing nations. Our consumption habits are driving a climate crisis that affects the poorest countries first and worst. Karoline could see that the conversation had shifted into territory where many Americans, regardless of political party, might feel defensive. She made a note on her pad and waited. I believe America can be a force for good, Alexandria continued. But only if we're honest about our mistakes and commit to doing better. Blind patriotism isn't patriotism at all. It's just nationalism, dressed up in a flag. The studio felt very quiet when she finished. The host let the moment hang for a beat, then turned to Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, these are strong statements about America's role in the world. Your response? Karoline looked directly at Alexandria, then at the camera. She could feel that this was the pivotal moment of the debate. Her response needed to be measured but firm. She placed her pen down deliberately and folded her hands. I think there's a fundamental difference in how we see America, she began, her voice calm but carrying a new intensity, and that difference matters. The camera zoomed in slightly on her face. The floor director signaled that they were approaching another commercial break. But Karoline knew that what she said next would be what people remembered from this debate. She gathered her thoughts, ready to deliver the response that would soon have everyone talking. Karoline took a moment to gather her thoughts. The studio was silent. Everyone waited for her response. Even the camera operators seemed to lean forward slightly. She knew that her next words would likely be the ones clipped for social media and news programs tomorrow. I believe there's a fundamental difference in how we see America, Karoline repeated, her voice clear and steady. And that difference matters. She looked directly at Alexandria across the studio. When I listen to the Congresswoman speak about America, I hear criticism after criticism. Problems without solutions. Complaints without context. And while we should always work to improve our nation, there's a difference between constructive criticism and the kind of rhetoric that tears down without building up. Alexandria started to interject, but Karoline continued, her tone remaining measured. The America I know isn't perfect, but it's good. It's a nation that has overcome tremendous challenges throughout its history. It's a place where people of all backgrounds can succeed. It's a country that has been a force for freedom and democracy around the world. She paused briefly, then added, when we focus only on America's flaws without acknowledging its virtues, we paint a false picture for the American people, especially young Americans who deserve to know the full truth about their country. Alexandria shook her head, visibly disagreeing. The host noticed and turned to her. Congresswoman, you seem eager to respond. Yes, because this characterization of my position is completely unfair, Alexandria said, leaning forward. Pointing out problems isn't the same as hating America. In fact, it's because I love this country that I want it to live up to its ideals. Karoline nodded slightly, acknowledging the point, but then she reached for a folder on the table beside. I respect that perspective, she said, but let's look at some specifics. In the past year alone, the Congresswoman has described America as systematically unjust, fundamentally broken, and built on exploitation. She has compared our border policies to concentration camps. She has suggested that the American dream is a myth. Karoline looked up from her notes. These aren't constructive criticisms. They're sweeping condemnations. The professor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The union representative looked down at his hands. The host sensed the tension and tried to broaden the conversation. Let's step back for a moment, he said. Both of you represent different generations and different visions for America. Beyond the specific policy disagreements, what do you think accounts for these different perspectives? Alexandria spoke first. I think it's about who gets to define America's story. For too long, that story has been told by those who benefited most from the status quo. My generation is asking different questions and challenging narratives that haven't served everyone equally. She gestured toward Karoline. And when we do that, we're told we're unpatriotic or ungrateful. But patriotism isn't about blind loyalty. It's about holding your country to high standards. Karoline listened carefully, then responded. I agree that patriotism isn't blind loyalty, she said, surprising some viewers. But there's a balance. When we discuss America's flaws, and yes, we have them, we should also acknowledge the progress we've made and the unique principles that make this country special. She turned slightly to face the camera directly. The Congresswoman talks about who gets to define America's story. But America's story isn't defined by politicians or pundits. It's defined by millions of everyday Americans who live their lives with dignity, work hard, raise families, serve their communities, and yes, work to make things better when they see problems. Alexandria nodded. On that we can agree. Every day, Americans are the heart of this country. For a moment, the tension in the studio eased slightly. The host seized the opportunity to move to another topic. Let's talk about solutions then. You both have identified problems, though you frame them differently. What are your visions for addressing these challenges? Alexandria went first. We need bold structural change, a Green New Deal to address climate change while creating millions of good jobs, Medicare for all to ensure health care as a right, student debt forgiveness and free public college, a wealth tax on billionaires to fund these investments in our future. She spoke with energy and conviction, her hands moving as she outlined her vision. These aren't radical ideas. They're common sense. And they're popular with the American people, regardless of what special interests and their allies in Washington might say. The host turned to Karoline. And your vision? Karoline nodded, accepting the question. My vision starts with remembering what made America successful in the first place: freedom, opportunity, innovation, and personal responsibility. She counted off points on her fingers as she continued. We need economic policies that create jobs and raise wages by unleashing American businesses, not burying them in regulations and taxes. We need healthcare reforms that increase access and lower costs through competition and innovation, not government control. We need education that prepares students for success and offers multiple pathways, not just expensive four-year degrees. The professor spoke up. Both approaches have historical precedent. The question is which better fits our current moment. The union representative added, working people don't care about the ideology, they care about results. Who's going to make their lives better? Karoline turned toward him. Exactly. And the policies that have consistently improved lives are ones that expand opportunity, not government dependency. Alexandria shook her head. That's a false choice. Government programs like Social Security and Medicare have lifted millions out of poverty. Public schools and universities have created opportunity. The GI Bill helped build the middle class. The debate continued, with both women making their points forcefully but respectfully. The host checked his watch, then looked at his notes. We have time for one more topic, he said. Recent polls show that Americans are deeply divided, not just on policy, but on basic values. Both of you represent different sides of that divide. Is there any common ground to be found? Alexandria responded first. I believe there is. Despite our differences, most Americans want similar things: security, opportunity, dignity. We disagree on how to get there, but those shared goals matter. Karoline nodded in agreement. I think that's right. And I'd add that most Americans, regardless of party, love this country and want it to succeed. We can disagree without questioning each other's motives or patriotism." She paused, then added, "The Congresswoman and I have very different views, but we're both here, engaging in democratic debate. That's something we should celebrate." The host seemed pleased with this moment of agreement. On that note, we'll wrap up tonight's discussion. I want to thank all our guests for a spirited but civil conversation. As the cameras prepared to cut away, Alexandria reached across to shake Karoline's hand. It was a brief moment, but viewers noticed. Despite their fundamental disagreements, there was a baseline of respect. "We'll be right back with final thoughts after this break," the host said as they cut to commercial. In the brief respite, Karoline checked her phone. It was already lighting up with messages. Clips from the debate were already spreading online. Her measured but firm defense of America was being shared widely. She had made her points without raising her voice or losing her composure. The floor. Director signaled that they would be back on air in 30 seconds. Karoline took a sip of water and prepared for the final segment. Whatever happened next, she knew she had represented her views well. In the world of political television, that counted as a victory. The red light on the camera blinked back on. The final segment of the show was about to begin. Karoline sat up straight, her posture perfect after years of media training. The host welcomed viewers back and turned to face the panel. "Before we wrap up tonight, I'd like to give each of our guests a minute for final thoughts," the host said. "Ms. Leavitt, let's start with you." Karoline nodded and looked directly into the camera. This was her chance to leave viewers with a lasting impression. "Thank you," she began. "Throughout tonight's discussion, we've covered many issues where Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and I disagree. That's healthy in a democracy. But I want to end by focusing on what unites us." She paused briefly, choosing her words carefully. "America faces real challenges. We all want to solve them. We want an economy that works for everyone. We want clean air and water. We want safe communities. We want opportunity for the next generation. Where we differ is in how to achieve these goals." Alexandria watched her intently, neither agreeing nor disagreeing, simply listening. "I believe in an America where government creates the conditions for people to thrive, but doesn't try to control their lives," Karoline continued. "Where we celebrate success rather than punish it. Where we learn from our history, both the good and the bad, and continue the long journey toward a more perfect union." She smiled slightly. "That's the America I'm fighting for, and I believe it's an America where most of us, regardless of party, can find common ground." The host nodded. "Thank you, Ms. Leavitt. Congresswoman, your final thoughts?" Alexandria leaned forward, her expression serious but passionate. "I appreciate what Ms. Leavitt just said about common ground. That matters. But I also think we need to be honest about our differences because they're real, and they affect people's lives." She gestured with her hands as she continued. "My vision for America is one where healthcare isn't tied to employment, where we tackle climate change with the urgency it demands, where wealth doesn't determine worth, where we face our history honestly so we can build a better future." Alexandria looked directly at Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt and I want many of the same things, but the policies she supports would continue a status quo that isn't working for millions of Americans. Sometimes love of country means demanding that it do better." The host thanked both women and turned to the other panelists for their brief closing remarks. As the show wrapped up, the cameras pulled back, revealing the wider studio. The floor. Director counted down, and finally the red lights turned off. They were no longer on air. "That's a wrap," called the director. "Great show, everyone." The studio burst into activity. Production assistants rushed in to remove microphones. The host shook hands with each guest, thanking them for their participation. Camera operators began breaking down equipment. Karoline gathered her notes and slipped them into her leather portfolio. Her phone was already buzzing with messages. She glanced at it briefly. Dozens of notifications from social media, texts from colleagues, and emails from news outlets requesting interviews. Across the studio, Alexandria was similarly checking her phone. A small crowd of staffers had gathered around her, talking animatedly. The two women caught each other's eyes briefly. Alexandria gave a small nod, which Karoline returned. They had been opponents, not enemies. "Ms. Leavitt?" A production assistant approached. "Your car is ready whenever." "You are. And the producer wanted me to tell you that your segment is already trending online." Karoline thanked her and stood up. As she made her way toward the exit, several crew members stopped her to compliment her performance. She was gracious, but brief, eager to get some quiet time to process the debate. In the green room, she gathered her belongings. Her press secretary was waiting for her, practically bouncing with excitement. "You were amazing," he said, handing her a bottle of water. "Twitter is blowing up. The clip of your response about American values has over 50,000 shares already." Karoline took a sip of water. "What's the reaction like?" "Overwhelmingly positive from our side," he replied, scrolling through his phone. "Even some moderates and independents are praising how you handled yourself. The contrast in tone was striking. You stayed calm and focused while making powerful points." He showed her a tweet from a prominent conservative commentator. "Leavitt masterclass in how to defend American values without getting baited into anger. More of this, please." Another notification popped up, a message from her former boss congratulating her on the performance. Karoline smiled slightly, appreciating the support. "What about the other side?" she asked, wanting the full picture. Her press secretary scrolled further. "Mixed. Some are attacking the substance of your arguments as expected, but even many progressive commentators are acknowledging that you were effective. One called it a frustratingly compelling defense of conservative principles." Karoline nodded. In political communication, earning respect from the opposition was rare and valuable. "The network wants you back next week," he added, "and 3 other shows have already reached out for interviews." "Let's look at those tomorrow," Karoline said. "Right now I just want to get home and get some rest." They gathered her things and headed for the exit. In the hallway they passed Alexandria and her team. Both groups paused awkwardly. "Good debate," Alexandria said simply. "Likewise," Karoline replied. "You made some compelling points. It wasn't friendship, but it was professional respect. In today's political climate, that counted for something." Outside the studio, the night air was cool. A black SUV waited at the curb. As Karoline slid into the back seat, she finally allowed herself to relax. The tension she had been holding in her shoulders began to release. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "I watched the whole thing," her mother said when Karoline answered. "You were so poised, honey. Your father and I are so proud." "Thanks, Mom," Karoline said, feeling a wave of tiredness wash over her. "It was intense." "You looked completely calm," her mother said. "Like you were born for this." After ending the call, Karoline leaned back against the seat as the car moved through the city streets. On her phone, clips of the debate continued to spread. Political analysts were already dissecting every word and gesture. By morning, millions of Americans would have seen her exchange with Alexandria. In her years working in politics, Karoline had learned that most television appearances were quickly forgotten, but occasionally a moment broke through, becoming part of the larger national conversation. Tonight felt like one of those moments. The car turned onto the highway. Karoline watched the city lights blur past the window. She thought about the points she had made, the arguments she had presented. She had stayed true to her beliefs while remaining respectful. In today's divided political landscape, that felt like an achievement. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a young woman who had worked with her during the campaign. "Watched you tonight. You're the reason I got into politics. Thank you for showing how to disagree without being disagreeable." Karoline smiled at that. Beyond the policy debates and partisan battles, setting an example of civil discourse mattered. She typed a quick thank you in response. As the car continued toward her apartment, Karoline allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. There would be more battles tomorrow. The news cycle would move on to new controversies. But tonight, she had represented her views with clarity and conviction. In politics, you couldn't ask for much more than that. Karoline woke early the next morning, Sunlight streamed through the blinds of her apartment. She reached for her phone before even getting out of bed. The debate had happened just 12 hours ago, but in the world of modern politics, that was an eternity. Her screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of emails, thousands of new social media followers, and dozens of missed calls. She scrolled quickly, trying to get a sense of how the story had developed overnight. The clip of her response to Alexandria had gone viral. Major news networks were playing it on repeat. Conservative outlets were celebrating her performance as a defining moment. Leavitt calmly dismantles progressive criticism of America, read one headline. Another declared, "Rising star shows how to defend American values without anger." Karoline got out of bed and made coffee. She turned on the television to see how the mainstream networks were covering the exchange. A panel of political analysts was discussing the debate. "What made Leavitt's performance so effective," said one commentator, "was that she never took the bait. She stayed focused on substance rather than personality. That's increasingly rare in today's political environment." Another analyst nodded. Both women represented their perspectives well, but Leavitt's calm demeanor created a striking contrast. When she talked about loving America while acknowledging its flaws, she connected with viewers across the political spectrum. Karoline sipped her coffee, listening carefully. The phone rang. Her boss, the party chairwoman. "I've been fielding calls about you all morning," the chairwoman said when Karoline answered. "Everyone wants to know where we found you." Karoline smiled. "I've been here all along." "Well, you certainly made an impression last night," the chairwoman continued. "The party leadership is impressed. They're talking about expanding your role, more media appearances, bigger platform." After promising to meet later in the week to discuss next steps, Karoline ended the call and checked her email. Interview requests from major publications filled her inbox. The Wall Street Journal wanted a profile piece. A national magazine wanted her for their Rising Stars in Politics issue. 3 book agents had reached out about potential memoir deals. It was overwhelming. Just one television appearance, and suddenly doors were opening everywhere. Karoline knew enough about politics to understand that these moments of opportunity were rare. The question was how to use this one. Her phone rang again. This time it was her former college professor, a mentor who had encouraged her interest in politics years ago. "I watched you last night," he said. "You did exactly what I always told my students. Make your case with facts, respect your opponent, and never lose your cool." "I remembered your advice," Karoline replied, "especially when things got heated." "You've always had a gift for communication," he said. "But last night showed something more, a clarity of conviction. That's rare these days." After their call, Karoline showered and dressed for the day. She had meetings scheduled at party headquarters to discuss strategy following the debate. As she applied her makeup, she thought about how quickly things had changed. 24 hours ago, she had been one of many young political voices. Now she was being hailed as a rising star. Her car arrived at 9. As they drove through the city, Karoline noticed a newspaper stand with her face on the front page, side by side with Alexandria. The headline read, "Youth versus Youth, the New Face of American Political Divide." At party headquarters, staffers greeted her with new respect. People who had barely noticed her before now stopped to offer congratulations. In the main conference room, senior party officials were waiting. "There she is," said the communications director, smiling broadly. "Our overnight sensation." Karoline shook her head. "Hardly overnight. I've been working toward this for years." "Of course," he said quickly. "But you have to admit the timing is perfect. The party has been looking for new voices who can reach younger voters without alienating the base. You threaded that needle perfectly last night." The meeting was productive but surreal. They discussed expanding her role, booking more high-profile media appearances, and even the possibility of her speaking at the next national convention. It was everything Karoline had worked for, happening faster than she had ever imagined. After the meeting, her press secretary showed her the latest metrics. The clip of her exchange with Alexandria had been viewed over 5 million times across various platforms. Her social media following had tripled overnight. A flash poll showed that among viewers who watched the debate, 62% found her arguments compelling or very compelling, including 28% who identified as political independents. "This is just the beginning," her press secretary said excitedly. "We need to capitalize on the momentum." Karoline nodded but felt a strange sense of caution. "Let's be strategic. Quality over quantity. I don't want to be everywhere saying nothing. I want to be selective and substantive." In the afternoon, she had a scheduled radio interview. The host was friendly, but pressed her on specific policy details that had only been touched on during the television debate. Karoline was prepared, answering with the same calm clarity she had shown the night before. When asked about Alexandria, she was respectful. "We have genuine disagreements about policy and perspective, Karoline said. But those disagreements don't have to be personal. I respect her passion and commitment, even when I disagree with her conclusions." After the radio interview, Karoline checked her phone again. Among the many messages was a surprising one, a text from Alexandria herself. "Good job on the show last night," the text read. "While I obviously disagree with many of your points, I appreciated the level of discourse. Perhaps we could grab coffee sometime and continue the conversation off camera." Karoline smiled slightly. It was an unexpected gesture. Despite their fundamental differences, there was a shared experience of being young women in the political spotlight. She typed a response. "I'd like that. Political opponents don't have to be personal enemies." As the day continued, Karoline moved from meeting to meeting, interview to interview. By evening, she was exhausted but exhilarated. What had begun as a single television appearance had transformed into something much larger, a potential turning point in her career. Her final meeting of the day was with a senior party strategist, a veteran of many campaigns. Unlike the others, he wasn't effusive with praise. "You did well," he said simply. "But now comes the hard part." "What's that?" Karoline asked. "Living up to the moment," he replied. "The spotlight finds many people in politics. The question is what you do with it once it finds you." Karoline nodded, understanding his point. "I don't want to be known just for one good television appearance. I want to be known for substantive contributions to the national conversation." "Then you're already ahead of most," the strategist said with a rare smile. "Keep that perspective and you'll go far." That evening, alone in her apartment, Karoline finally had time to process everything. She sat by the window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone continued to buzz with notifications, but she set it aside for a moment. The past 24 hours had changed her professional trajectory. There would be new opportunities, new platforms, new challenges. But the core of who she was and what she believed remained the same. She had succeeded not by being the loudest voice, but by being the clearest one. Not by attacking her opponent, but by defending her principles. In a political landscape often defined by anger and division, she had shown there was another way forward. It wasn't about destroying or obliterating the other side. It was about making a compelling case for your vision of America, while acknowledging that those who disagreed with you loved the country too. As she finally turned off the lights and prepared for bed, Karoline felt ready for whatever came next. The spotlight had found her. Now it was up to her to use it wisely,